So here's here are the curves, right? So this is our what we referred to earlier as the auditory response area. This whole green area here is the auditory response area. So this is what we can barely, this is all the threshold of hearing where we go from being able to hear it to not hear it. And this is where the threshold of feeling the pain in your ear. Notice the higher the line on this along the y-axis here means that you're less sensitive to the sound. So for example, humans don't hear the very low frequencies very well, like for example about 30 hertz. We don't hear that very well at all, but we hear really well around 4,000 hertz, which is where conversational speech is located, is right about there in this little area here. These are the equal loudness curves for 80 and for 40. Notice that for the most part, at 80 decibels, that loudness, everything sounds about the same until you get to the very high frequencies. They start hurting your ears, right? But notice at 40 decibels, notice that the middle frequencies are pretty flat, but we have trouble hearing the high frequencies, and we have trouble hearing the low frequencies at 40 hertz. Pitch is is related to the number of cycles, the number of hertz in the set of frequencies that are in a complex tone or in a pure tone. And that's what we perceive as pitch, and we perceive it as very high or very low, right? One great way to look at pitch is to look at the the layout of a keyboard, right? So if you know how to play piano, which I don't know how to play a piano, but each one of the keys produces a particular note, A through G, A through G, A through G, and here are the corresponding fundamental frequencies for each note. And notice as you go across the keyboard from left to the right, the tone height increases. In other words, the pitch increases, going from the low keys here to the very high pitched keys here. Notice also that when you go, you get this A note, the lowest A, and then you go up another octave to the next A, another octave to this A, another octave to this A. Notice that each change in octave is a multiple of the fundamental frequency. So the fundamental frequency is 27.5 hertz. 27.5 times 2 is 55. 27.5 times 3 is and then it doubles again to 110, right? And then that frequency doubles to 220. Then that fundamental frequency doubles to 440, and then that fundamental frequency doubles to 880, and then that fundamental frequency doubles, etc. Right? We have a doubling of the frequency, which is a change in octave, which we perceive as a change in octaves. Another aspect of sound is timbre. Timbre is it's hard to get your timbre is kind of where we lump together all of the other aspects of sounds that we don't directly measure usually. I mean, we can, but because right up to this point, all we've talked about is loudness, pitch, and duration, right? How loud it is, the different pitches, and the duration. But as you know, musical instruments have very complex sounds. And that rich complexity of sound that's produced by a musical instrument or anything is referred to as the total timbre. It's related to the harmonics that are present, how many harmonics are being produced, and also the attack and decay of a particular tone. Whether a tone has a slow, gradual increase, or whether there's nothing and then it attacks all of a sudden, and then Maybe it has a slow decrease, or it plays for a while and then it just shuts down. All of those things mix together to produce a timbre. And you can experience that, for example, if you listen to a flute and an oboe play the exact same note, the exact same pitch. You're gonna be able to tell, well, that's a flute and that's an oboe, and that's because the flute and oboe have different timbres. They have different properties associated with the frequencies that are being generated. And as I said earlier, you can remove the fundamental frequency from a set of tones, but we still perceive the same pitch, but it has a different timbre associated with it. So it's the same pitch, right? I can tell, yeah, that's the same pitch, but it sounds a little weird. It sounds different. That pitch, though, that we can tell is called the periodicity pitch, which means that we're able to tell the same pitch. Even with the first fundamental frequency removed, but it does have a different timbre because because you're missing one of the frequencies in the harmonics. So here's an example of different instruments and the different frequencies they generate. So here's a guitar. You strum a string on a guitar and it's going to generate this set of frequencies, and the loudest being around I'm guessing 500-ish or so. And then you have a bassoon, and it's going to generate this set of frequencies. And then you have, these are three instruments playing the exact same note. So guitar is playing a note, a bassoon's playing a note, and an alto sax playing a note. And they're playing the same note at the same pitch, but notice the set of frequencies that's being generated by each instrument is very different. And this is part of what makes up the timbre of the sound of a particular instrument. Tones. Each tone can has a property known as the attack and decay. So the attack of the tone is the buildup of the sound at the beginning. So in other words, does it go like that, or does it go just with a sudden attack? And then the decay of the tone is the decrease in sound at the end. So does it go for a slow decay, or does it go for a fast decay, right? So each one of these tones, each tone, when it presents itself in the stuff that you're listening to, each tone's going to have a particular attack and decay, and of course, the attacks and decays of the tone are going to change the timbre, are going to change the timbre of the tone, of the way the tone is being expressed. So, for example, a bell. If you were to hit a chime or a bell, that's going to have a very sudden attack, bing, right? Whereas an instrument like a trumpet might have a much slower attack on a particular tone. So, that section we just talked about covered the physical aspects of sound. Now we're going to talk about the mechanics and properties of our hearing. So the outer ear is called the pinna. The big goofy part here of cartilage that you have here is called the pinna. And the pinna helps with sound location because we're picking up sounds specifically in front of and to the side of us. So the pinna is a really important piece of anatomy that allows us to localize where sounds are coming from. But the pinna gathers the sounds and it funnels it into the auditory canal, which is a little tube about 3 centimeters long, at the end of which is the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. We have the tympanic membrane buried 3 centimeters into our auditory canal to protect us. So the tympanic membrane is away from the outside world, so that because it's very sensitive. Every well, pretty much every physical thing, but like a tube or a musical instrument, has what's called a resonant frequency. It's a frequency that where it resonates the best, and the resonant frequency of our auditory canal is between 1,000 and 5,000 hertz, which is, of course, is the range of normal spoken speech, right? Which makes sense. So we hear best between 1,000 and 5,000 hertz, and our auditory canals are tuned to carry sounds within that range. Here's a cartoon drawing of our of our ear. So here is the pinna, which is the ear, and the sound then gets collected by the pinna and gets put into the auditory canal. The vibrating sound waves traveling to the auditory canal hit the tympanic membrane or the eardrum. And the tympanic membrane is a very thin membrane that is very sensitive. If you're like me and you listen to very loud heavy metal music for your youth, you're hard of hearing. That's why I can't hear, because I've spent a lot of time listening to very loud music, and so I damage my hearing. And one of the reasons I damage my hearing is because my tympanic membrane is scarred. It's actually been torn, and now it has scar tissue, so it doesn't vibrate as well. But the tympanic membrane has attached to the back of it the malleus, which is a Latin term meaning hammer, and it's a little tiny little bone that vibrates along with the tympanic membrane. That vibration of the malleus is picked up by another little tiny bone called the incus, which is Latin for anvil. And the incus is connected to another little tiny bone called the stapes, which is Latin for stirrup, like on a horse saddle. So the sound vibrations cause the tympanic membrane, the malleus, incus, and stapes to vibrate. The vibration is then carried to this organ right here, known as the cochlea. It is the organ of hearing. This is the organ where all the magic happens, where the vibrations are converted from physical vibrations into electrical impulses in the nervous system. This is where it all happens. On top of the cochlea, we have these semicircular canals, and these are 3 little canals that are filled with fluid and with little tiny little tiny stones inside of them. You'll notice that we have one canal going in the x-axis, one in the y-axis, and one in the z-axis. So you have these canals that can detect movement along any of the 3 dimensions of space. And we use our semicircular canals for detecting our positions in space and for maintaining balance. So if you've ever been spun around really quickly on a on a merry-go-round, and then you get off and and everything's still spinning, the reason it's still spinning is because your semicircular canals are the fluid in your canals is still swishing around and sending signals to your brain that you're still moving. So that's the ear. Of course, here we have the eustachian tube. And this tube here is used to balance the pressure between the outside and the inside in the middle ear. And of course, if you get these clogged up or infected, you get earaches, right? And if you're sometimes little tiny babies need to have tubes put in to clear these out because they get a lot of ear infections. Right? So the middle ear is where has the little bones called the ossicles, and the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. So the tympanic membrane vibrates, sends the vibrations to the malleus sends the vibrations to the incus sends the vibrations to the stapes. The stapes is connected to the cochlea, to a little part of the cochlea called the oval window. So there's a little thin part of the cochlea where the stapes sits on top of. It's stuck on top of it, and that's where the vibrations come through and hit the cochlea so that the vibrations can be turned into neural signals. The ossicles, the outer and the inner ear, are filled with air. Now, the inner ear is filled with fluid that is much more dense than air. And what this means is the pressure changes. The pressure changes in the air don't transmit very well in the fluid of the ear. So the bones, these ossicles, they transmit that air vibration, and there's little muscles attached to the ossicles that if all of a sudden you hear something that's way too loud and the ossicles vibrate too much, these little muscles tighten and keep the ossicles from vibrating. So the ossicles serve a couple of purposes. They serve the purpose of allowing the fluid-filled part of the inner ear it allows for the transmission of the vibrations through the fluid-filled part of the inner ear, and the ossicles also serve as a buffer, as a way of protecting the inner ear from dangerous outside vibrations.